Unless you've been living under a rock, you might have seen this little indie game come out 2 years ago called Elden Ring. Now, when it first came out, I couldn't care less. I'd never given a From Software game or a Souls-like game any real try. I could argue that I tried Dark Souls with my cousin years ago, but in reality, we beat the first tutorial boss and then kept dying to skeletons who kept coming back to life and killing us. Yes, I now understand what the problem was. But when it came to Elden Ring, I simply didn't look at it at all. I even remember telling my dad about the game and him also kind of dismissing it like I did, which he would later on be consumed by the game and end up beating it like 7 times. So I decided to keep an open mind and just dive in. My God, was I in for a treat. This would end up being my first time truly playing a game that would open the door, toss you in, and tell you to figure it out yourself. No menus, no quests, no real tutorials. I genuinely had no idea what I was doing. Anyway, I opened the door to Limgrave, walked through, and made a mistake I imagine many players did. I took on the tree sentinel. I died. And then I died. And then I died about 20 more times. And after the quick 20 deaths to this giant oaf on a horse, I decided to avoid him and make my way to a church I saw in the distance. And from that point on, I was in love. It was a fairly simple foundation for a game. Here's a world, go explore it. From Software made me feel like I was in the world, as if the world was alive, even if I never was, from dying over and over again. The art style, the design, everything was just beautiful and very evidently handcrafted. It seems like a world where every blade of grass was placed with a purpose. My first playthrough, I remember deciding to pick up magic because it simply looked cool. That's it. That was the entire reason. It looked cool, so I tried it out. Of course, I later learned that it was OP as hell, and from there on, a majority of my time was spent throwing rock sling at every single enemy and boss. And speaking of the bosses, can we please take a moment and appreciate the design and style of each of the bosses? They all feel unique, as if the stories and their pasts were just alive. The bosses and their pacing heavily influence the world and how it felt. Each area seems to directly connect to the location's boss. For example, you find a lift in the middle of the forest. You take it, expecting to find a small dungeon. Instead, after about 5 minutes of waiting to reach the bottom, you arrive at what appears to be an entirely different world. And the world would end up being filled with its own enemies and its own bosses. And that's exactly what it was. One of the major bosses in this beautifully mystical underground hell is a beautifully mystical, gigantic fucking deer. And you see it, and all that comes to mind is, oh, of course I'm about to fight a spiritual deer. Why wouldn't I? It's Elden Ring. And that is directly what made me fall in love with this game. Right out of the gate, it sets a standard. And it not only consistently maintains that standard, but it takes it higher and higher and higher, until all you have left is depression because you will never be able to play this game for the first time again. All the gameplay that you've seen in this video is from my last playthrough that I just wrapped up, and it all started because I wanted to revisit Elden Ring after nearly 2 years, and going in, my primary goal was to play through the main story and make a video about Elden Ring 2 years later. Well, it didn't exactly go down that way. I kind of ended up falling in love with Elden Ring again, and I found myself exploring the world after I'd forgotten so many of the smaller details, and I spent hours upon hours once more exploring and appreciating a world that FromSoft created. I had not played a Souls-like game since Bloodborne, which I played about a year ago, and so I was out of practice with the Souls-like experience. I had not played a Souls-like game since Bloodborne, which I played a year ago, and so I was quite out of practice, and to my surprise, I picked it up pretty quickly. I defeated Margit the Fell Omen on the first try, and after that I was pretty confident in my ability, and I went on a roll. I quickly beat Godric, Radahn, Rennala, and Lord Rykard, And actually, the only boss I died more than twice on was Malekith, who I spent probably 2 hours stuck on. I had never fought him with the style of build I was running, so it felt completely different, which is one of the most prominent strengths that Elden Ring has. Freedom. You have not only the freedom to use whatever kind of build you want, but the game allows you to experience fights completely differently depending on your type of build. Using a mage, you play from more distance, so you don't always feel like you're constantly dodging or under attack. But using the giant colossal sword that I felt a little bit tankier and ate more hits, and I found that my main problem was stamina. Actually, that stamina problem is probably what got me killed so many times in the Malekith fight, but we'll move on. After beating those first 5 major bosses is when I did the majority of my exploration. I used a lot less sites of grace that I did in the past, and I tried to just enjoy the journey more than the destination of beating all the bosses. So I thoroughly checked the capital, the godforsaken sewers. I hate that place. The Siofra River, however you pronounce it. One of my biggest complaints with Elden Ring would likely be the loot you get. 99% of it I never use, and this is definitely a problem with my playstyle. I understand that, but I just almost never use consumables. I simply don't know what most of them do. And while this is a complaint I have with the game, I think it's more of a problem with the way I play these games and not necessarily a game design issue. But overall, if I could play a game for the first time again, it would most likely be Elden Ring. I'm not sure I've played a better open world game featuring a world that was as carefully put together than Elden Ring. A world where even the smallest, most annoying creatures have relevance. Thank you for joining me and watching. This video was fun to make, and I'm very excited for the video I have been working on. It will be a good bit longer, and because of that, it is taking more time to make, though. So expect that next week or the week after.